Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Elissa Grossel Dickey. Elissa is a former journalist who now works in higher education communications. She has shared her journey of living with multiple sclerosis through her blog post for the National MS Society and is the author of Speed of Light. Her latest release is Iris in the Dark. And here to talk about that and so much more is Elissa Grossel Dickey. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Elissa.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Elissa, I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody, which is, tell me, where does your story as a writer begin?
I think I would have to say it started, I have this memory in third grade where we were all supposed to write stories about, I feel like it was about an inanimate object because mine was a lemon or something. And then they printed them off and put them all on the wall for parents to see. And everyone else's fit on a page and mine was like 4 pages long hanging down the wall. So that's maybe where the first inkling of maybe I should write stories came from.
Do you remember anything about that 4-page story about a lemon?
Nothing at all, except seeing it there and like, wow, mine is a lot longer than everyone else's, and being sort of embarrassed, but also sort of like, how could they not have written more about their lemon or whatever they were writing?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you squeezed a lot of juice out of that lemon.
I sure did. That's a good way to put it. But no, I was also the kid who always had a book in her hand and would visit the bookmobile. I'm from a small town, so the bookmobile would come, or I would do mail a book and mail me books. I mean, that was like old school Netflix used to be or something.
Sure. What small town were you from?
Deer River, Minnesota. It's a very small town, up in the Duluth area.
Oh, Minnesota.
Yes, you can tell the longer we talk, the more, because my husband says my accent will come out when I, talk a lot. But no, that's where I'm from originally. And but no, so writing was always something that I loved, and what that led to was a career in journalism at first. But I always, in the back of my mind, I always knew that I wanted to write novels, and I would start some, but I was working full time, and I still am, and married, have kids, like life is happening, and it was always going to be something that I did later, was pursue this dream. Then about 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with MS. And so at first I thought I missed my chance and spent some time kind of, upset about that. But then I realized that, no, this is my chance. And so then I really started to try to fit it into my life, like writing, like it's not just going to happen. I have to do it. And here we are. Now I have 2 books out.
Here we are. So what was that like? If you feel comfortable talking about it. So getting that diagnosis, hearing the words, did it solve a mystery for you? What was going on in your life at the time?
Sure. Yes. And that's kind of the weird thing. And I do talk about that in the Speed of Light, because it was very therapeutic to write it. But that at first getting a diagnosis is like, it's a good thing. It's a positive, because you've had, like for me, I was having like numbness on and off, and like, where I was struggling to walk, and you have to get tests and rule things out. And so it was like, finally you have this answer and you feel like, okay, I've got this answer, I'm good. But then you're like, wait a minute, no, this is not a good thing. And, this is life-changing. And so I do think for a while I was in some denial about the fact, because I still had, my youngest was 1.5 years at that age. And, I wasn't ready to just throw in the towel by any means. But there were a lot of emotions and relief, but then mixed with fear and worry and doubt. And a lot of that came through in the Speed of Light, I think.
Yeah. So tell me about writing that first book. What was I hate the term journey, but it is descriptive. What was the writer's journey like from that book?
Well, and honestly, the Speed of Light was the 3rd manuscript I wrote. The first one I finished, I did sign with my agent. So I'll talk about that one
please.
Ironically, I feel like even though it was my diagnosis that spurred me to complete my first novel, I couldn't have written about it then. Like it was, a few years later, my third novel that I was finally able to feel like, I think I can, I'm brave enough to write this. I'm able to write this story and kind of be the story that I needed when I was first diagnosed. But no, completing the first one was a matter of, like the kids went to bed, I would write instead of watching TV, and I would just make it like part of my daily life until I finished it. And then it took about a year to like write the end. And then along the way, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I want to get this published. Like, what do? I had no idea. I didn't know you needed an agent. I didn't, think about revising. But luckily, I found someone a former coworker from the newspaper I used to work at, that she was also trying to be published. And she lives in like locally. And so we kind of formed our own little club, and that has really helped. I mean, because it's such a solitary journey trying to write something and get it published, that it was so nice to have kind of a partner in crime along the way. And the more I learned, like entering pitch contests and mentorship contests and like all of that, kind of eventually querying and getting rejected, and realizing, okay, polishing your query, polishing your pages, and all of that ultimately led to signing with my agent.
Yeah. I thank you so much for sharing that, because I think a lot of people, and a lot of people who listen to the show are aspiring writers themselves, or they're interested, like I am, in sort of backstories. So just hearing that, it's not just about writing the story, it's everything else you have to do to get it out there.
Right.
And there's that must be a very steep learning curve for that first one out of the gate, right?
It really, yes. I mean, I think my first manuscript that my poor critique partner had to read was 150 some thousand words. Because
oh my goodness,
I had no clue. I'm just like, right, because this, and I was totally a pantser when I first started. And now I'm like, okay, I think I have fully become a plotter, but just I have to like have a plan. Yes, I'll go off the rails a little bit, but then at least that plan is there to guide. But no, back then, and then queries, like I had no idea how much to include. Try to be super cute and cutesy, and like, no, that's all. Like I feel like I've made every mistake they tell you not to make, and yet somehow I still ended up here. So maybe that's inspirational to some writers.
Yeah. Well, it worked out. I mean, but making mistakes is all part of it. I remember, some of the earlier query letters I've written. I mean, the first manuscript I wrote, I will not reread because it's so bad. It's not bad. It's just it's cringy. It's cringy.
You've improved since then, and you can see it now, things you couldn't see before.
Yeah, totally.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. So, what do you like most about sort of this sort of career pivot as an author?
Oh, honestly, the people I've met along the way, from my critique partner to there's like a group of authors that debuted the same year. We have a Facebook group, and then even a smaller amount like that. We're in the same kind of publishing house. We have our little Instagram group, like group chat, where it's, it's just nice to have that where you can check in and either be like commiserate, like, yay, this happened, or sad, this happened, like people that know what you're going through and that are going through the same thing, that have dealt with the same issues, and that can really help. And, we can boost each other when we need it. It's been really great.
It's interesting. I used to think of writing as a very solitary process, and to some extent it is. When you're writing your manuscript, it is solitary, but everything else around it is, there is a community out there, and I think the community aspect is very important, for networking, but for morale building too. To know that you're kind of not alone. You're going through these shared experiences with people, having people, just to bounce ideas off of, or get some honest feedback from. Right. That there is that, so I always encourage like aspiring writers out there to join communities, find workshops, have a critique partner, who you're not blood related to, or married to, is very helpful. It's very helpful.
It is. And that's something that I definitely learned. The writing community is amazing. And I mean, say what you will about Twitter, because it has its tons of downsides, but that is honestly, I would not probably be here if I hadn't thought out, like, you go on hashtags, writing community. And for me, Pitch Wars, Pit Mad, those were huge in terms first of just finding people out there doing the same thing as you, or learning the same thing, but people would give tips, and there'd be like critique partner matches, and you just, it opened up a whole new world that I feel like, me, just working mom living in South Dakota, never would have probably, I have zero connections, and I never would have known what to do otherwise.
South Dakota is one of my two favorite Dakotas.
Really? Oh, I feel good about that. I don't want to, no offense, North Dakota, but I like to say we are the better Dakota, but that's probably not fair.
That's right. And that's
they think the same.
That's hashtag, dad joke alert right there. I'm curious, your latest, Iris in the Dark. What can you tell me about it?
Well, it leans a little more suspense than my first one. And a reader has coined the phrase thrillmance. And I'm like, I love that, because I feel like my stories are always going to have a little bit of thriller and a little bit of romance in them. And this one is about a single mom who has to face her dark past when she hears cries for help in the night over a old walkie-talkie her son finds when they're house sitting at a hunting lodge on the South Dakota prairie.
Ooh,
so
that's a very kind of interesting setting.
Yes, yeah. And so the setting does play in too, because it is set rural South Dakota, and it's kind of my love letter to moving out here. I came from the tree-filled Minnesota, and it was disconcerting the first, when I moved out here. It's so open, but I've really just grown to love it, and it's beautiful in its own way. But at the same time, it's kind of perfect for this isolation that she's dealing with, and this creepiness where, outside the wind is howling and it's open for miles, and inside she's dealing with this. And so I think it was kind of the perfect setting for that kind of chilling feel. Or I hope it was anyway.
So does it take place in present day, or does it take place in the past? Interesting.
There's two timelines. You get a flashback to her past throughout the book, but for the most part, the story is set in modern day.
Interesting. I love the idea of a walkie-talkie coming into play, because as a kid, my twin brother and I had walkie-talkies, and they're kind of, with cell phones now.
I know.
You really, unless you're like a cop or an EMT or something, you don't see a lot of people with walkie-talkies.
Right.
But I love that aspect. What inspired you to put a walkie-talkie in there?
It actually came from, I knew I wanted her past to kind of creep back in this chilling way. And a couple of years ago, when I was just, kind of the story was coming together, my son, he was, I think 7 or 8 at the time, we were cleaning the toy room. Well, he was playing while I was cleaning. And so he found these older walkie-talkies and was playing while I was just, going along. And suddenly we heard a child's voice through the other one. And I'm like, is that your brother? He's like, no, it's right here. And I'm like, oh, okay. It was creepy, but I'm like, oh, it's some sort of frequencies getting crossed. That happens, but I shut it off. And then I'm like, okay. I never did find out what it was, but I'm like, I've got my plot hole fixed here.
That's awesome. I love that story, because I think authors, there are so many people in life who would have that experience and just write it off.
I know.
No pun intended, right? So they would just not even think twice about it. But an author, will think, oh my God, what if? And that's
Right.
I think the best tool in a writer's toolbox. It's not their vocabulary. I mean, that's important. Right. It's the imagination. It's the ability to say, what if that voice on the other end of that walkie-talkie were from the past, right. Were somebody from some other dimension trying to get off, and then all of a sudden you've got your spark, and then right. you can't help but, follow it.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's where a lot of my story ideas come from, where it's either my terrifying what ifs that I think of when I'm nervous, but then I'm like, well, let's answer it and write something. Or I base it on something that's happened in real life, but then I think, what if something terrible happened? I have one story, something I'm working on that's not anything yet, but I studied abroad in Ireland. I'm like, okay, what if she studied abroad in Ireland, but the trip ended with a death? And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure why I always go there, but at the same time, that's a story idea.
So I have this story where I was in Cape Cod, which is where we would vacation every summer, and I had just finished addressing the last of my editor's comments on a manuscript. Yeah. And my wife was not very thrilled that I was doing quote unquote work on the trip, but I was done, and I vowed to myself, okay, not going to start anything new for a while. That lasted 20 minutes because I went to, so I'm Catholic, I went to church. Sure. And there was, I'm going to peg him at about 104, 104-year-old priest saying mass. And I'm looking at him and he nods off. And I'm like, what would happen if he just dropped dead right now? What would happen? Yep. And then I went home and started outlining a story about a priest who drops dead on the altar. And that became the last homily,
Oh, wow.
aptly titled.
Right.
But that's what we do. It's like
Mhm.
the scorpion and the frog. It's like, I won't sting you. And then he stings him, and the frog asks why, and he's like, I'm a scorpion. That's what I do.
Right.
We can't not do it. I mean, to some
Right.
extent, we can't not do
Right.
it.
We can't control when we get that idea. And usually it's in the inopportune times when you've said you wouldn't work. It's, sorry, I got to write this down at least, so don't forget.
I know. And sometimes ideas come to me in the car. And when my kids were
Yeah.
younger, I mean, we have triplets, they're 20 years old now, but when they were younger, I would take them to school every morning, and then I'd get an idea for like something I'm working on. And I'd say, okay, Maggie, text me. And then I'd give her some really asinine thing. And the older they got, like we're talking high school, they're like, we don't want to know what goes through your head. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because I'll be like, hey, Patrick, text me bloody knife, kitchen sink, question mark or something like that. And he'd be like, oh God, Dad's at it again.
I'd be like, Dad, if anybody ever goes through our phones, they're going to be like wondering what's going on.
Or browser history. If
Oh my God.
somebody goes through my browser history, I'm in deep trouble. Like if
Right.
SVU came to my house,
Yeah.
and they said, we got your computer, Mr. Carlin. We're going to find the proof on it. They're going to see some weird shit on. Pardon me.
I know.
Weird shit on there.
I really hope that they have some sort of like caveat for, oh, this person's an author. It's okay.
Right.
The weirdest thing.
That's right. Very good. Very good. Well, I know the book has been released already, so it's available for sale now. How's the publicity tour going for it?
It's been great. I mean, people have been just wonderful. And I tell you, Bookstagram is amazing. I think I didn't do that enough with my first one, but it's just so nice seeing readers out there posting about it, these beautiful pictures they have. I just love it. Yeah. So it's been wonderful.
Have you done TikTok yet? I know you mentioned Twitter, but have you ventured to TikTok?
I'm on TikTok, but it's kind of like, as my son would say, cringy. If he tells me something is okay, then I'm like, oh yes, I really nailed it. Sometimes he'll laugh and I'll be like, just like it, please. Or, so I'm trying, but it's.
Yeah, no, I haven't done it. But I know I just talked to an author last week who, I guess what's really popular with TikTok and like other forms of like Reels type videos.
Yes.
Those short videos on social, where somebody gets to the twist in your book and they record a video of them reacting to the twist. And those have been popular. I just, I don't think I'm cool enough, honest to God, to do TikTok. I can't dance, number one. That's out the window.
Yeah. So far I've tried to do things where I don't actually have to like be on camera or talk. It's more the music slideshow, showing the pictures.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm like, that's maybe why I'm not taking off, because I don't know what I'm doing. But
well, I refuse to engage. I know you mentioned Twitter before. I refuse to engage on Twitter because I always leave Twitter mad at somebody or something or some group of people. I just get upset.
It is. I feel like one of those, it's like, oh, I owe so much to it as far as learning in the writing community. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, it's less and less healthy to be on it. I feel like for human.
Yeah, no, geez, tell me about it. All right, so let's do some, not that this hasn't been fun, but some fun questions. I'm curious, Elissa, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were growing up?
Oh, my all-time favorite. I'm a huge X-Files fan. So that was junior high teenage years, but that was like, I don't know if you remember that they were on Friday nights. That was my Friday night plan was.
So I thought X-Files was on Sunday nights.
I thought originally when it started, it was Friday, but
it could have been. I know it wound up on Sundays because my brothers and I would do football Sundays and then watch the X-Files and like Party of Five or something like that.
Great combo. Yeah.
It was a great combo play.
I loved it.
I love the X-Files. I watched that to the bitter end. The movies could have been better.
I know, but I'm kind of like, I feel like you have fans who are like super, they'll critique it, and then you have fans who are just like happy that it's there. And I was one of those fans that was just happy when it came back. And I'm like, I don't care what they do. I'm just happy to see Mulder and Scully again on the screen. Did
you watch those two? They kind of rebooted it a couple years ago.
They did.
Did you watch those? They had 2 seasons, I think, of it.
Yeah.
But I was wanting more. Like I definitely wanted more.
I felt like it ended, like maybe when they ended it, they were hoping for another season, because I kind of feel like it wasn't cliffhangery, but there was a little bit open-ended. And I'm like, maybe they'll announce, like they were just waiting to announce it. But that's been a few years now and they haven't.
I just got into this show and I saw it, you promoted, not promoted, but they did a segment on it on the CBS morning show this Sunday. It's called Evil. And it is the X-Files. It's like a modern day X-Files, but
Really?
for like religious phenomena.
Oh,
So there's like demons and the devil,
oh,
and
scary.
you've got like a Mulder and Scully combo plate
Really?
of like the believer and the skeptic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's got dark humor in it, which to some
Okay.
extent, the X-Files, sometimes you get like a
Right.
very humorous episode,
Right.
like the one with like Charles Nelson Riley. I'll never
Yeah.
forget. Um, and I know Duchovny loved, whenever he could do humor, he
Yeah.
was happy. But this show's really good. Like it got me. I'm like, wow. But it's like I haven't found like a show like the X-Files since then.
Yeah.
This could be it. So I would check it out.
I might check it out. I've been
Um,
really into Stranger Things, and it's
oh,
something
of
that
course. Are you
my
kidding
older
me?
son and I can watch. And this, I mean, if you watch the
Oh
first,
yeah, I'm up to date.
it was the scariest. That I think that's the one thing. It's like I would watch the X-Files, I'd watch whatever when I was younger, but now I feel like it's more scared than I
This
used
is definitely scary.
to.
And I scream at the TV. I'm like, if these kids would just stop playing Dungeons and Dragons, like
I
none of this would happen,
know
right?
everything.
None
Yeah,
of this would happen.
exactly.
But I'm a little pissed at the way they did the season because I've got to wait
Oh,
until July for the final 2 episodes of this season, but they're both like 8 hours long or something. That's
I know, 'cause that's what it's like. Okay, like my son would be like, let's just watch one more episode, Mom. And he's 15 and it's summer, but I'm, I can't be up so late. And it's like, okay, it's like an episode is like a movie length for
yeah.
this. And I'm like, okay, we're up till past midnight here. But
It's interesting. Like those kids are slightly younger than I was at that period of time, right?
yeah,
In
that's how I
'86
felt
or
too.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
But my daughter, because she loved watching it with me, she's like, "Was that how life was like? Where you go on bikes and use walkie-talkies?" I'm like, "That's exactly how life was. Like we
Yeah,
didn't have cell phones. That's what we did. We were outside. We would have these little adventures. I
right.
mean, I wasn't part of the Dungeons and Dragons crowd, but we did stuff like that." And she's like, "I really wish I grew up in that period of time." And I'm like, "I do too, because
Yeah.
you guys with your noses and your phones and your screens, you're
Yeah,
missing out on so much of the fun of life."
it's so different.
So X-Files. Anything else besides X-Files and Stranger Things?
Honestly, we watched a lot of SNL growing up, Saturday Night
Of
Live.
course. God.
Not when I was super young, but I feel like probably my parents let us watch it, maybe a little too young. But I loved the era of like Mike Myers,
Mhm.
and then getting into Will Ferrell, Adam Sandler, like that era.
Yeah.
Of course, Chris Farley. But yeah, that's
Oh God. Poor
when I
Chris
think of my
Farley.
childhood watching TV, that's probably one of the most influential on me.
Yeah. A friend of mine had a theory that everyone's favorite cast of SNL was whoever was on when they were in high school.
Oh,
And when I was in high school, it was Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Mike
yep.
Myers,
Yep.
just before, Will Ferrell and Farley
Yep.
and all that. And I love the show up until like Bill Hader,
Yep.
who I absolutely love. He's great in
Yeah.
Barry. Not Kevin Nealon. Who's the other guy? Kristen Wiig.
Oh, yeah.
It's still a great show.
It is. And I only watch it on and off now, I feel like.
Yeah,
But
I just can't stay up anymore.
problem. I'm like, maybe I'll watch it on YouTube the next day or something.
You miss. I mean, it's not the same. Not the
Right.
same. Transitioning from TV, how about musical artists? Who were you listening to when you were growing up?
Oh, well, being from a small town in the Midwest, I had a country phase, which was a very long country phase, but Garth Brooks was the king. I
Oh
feel,
God, he's the best.
probably for everybody. But then as I got older, I would say like Alanis Morissette, like she was huge. Sarah McLachlan, Fiona Apple, like that's kind of my jam in high school, I would say.
Sure, yeah, all those Lilith Fair type artists,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
In fact, I went to Lilith Fair. I was telling my husband about it. He's like, "What was this?" And I'm like, "Oh, it was a thing. Where in the '90s?" I'm in.
and you're like, you're not invited because you're not one of us, so you can't.
No,
come.
and he's like, "What?" I don't know.
No, I remember that was like Liz Fair.
Yep. Lisa Loeb.
Lisa Loeb and Nine Stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, look
It
at
was
that.
very cool.
Yeah, cool time. What did you learn? What lessons do you feel like, kind of going back to that first novel, right?
Yeah.
What lessons about publishing do you feel like you had to learn the hard way?
Oh, that's a good. I think just that you can't, it's not it's the word, a meritocracy. Like, you work hard because you should, and you want to do the best you can, but you have no control once it's out, as far as, like, do your best, promote it the best you can, but ultimately there's so much. I mean, a good book, it has to be good, of course. Like, you need to work on your skill and everything, but there's luck and timing involved, and there's also marketing involved, and there's all these factors that, like, I'm kind of a type A sometimes, maybe all the time, where I'm like, what can I do? What can I do? But sometimes you just have to let it go and hope for the best.
Yeah. There is this notion that I have, which is writing could be the easy part, especially if you're talented.
Right.
It's the promotion and getting it out there that makes all the difference in the world,
Right.
because there's a lot of good books out there.
Right.
But and you're right, there is luck, but there's a promotion too, which is which is critical, which is critical. And if you can't master it, it's like, be prepared to only have your friends and family be the ones buying your book.
I know, and it's hard because, like, you as one person can only do so much unless you're independently super wealthy and have all the time in the world, which none of us do. so I think it's a lesson that you're like, you do it because you love it, and you do the best you can, and certainly you try to keep leveling up your craft and taking opportunities and working hard, and just be kind to everyone. But at the end of the day, like, don't base your entire worth on how well your book is selling. And I'm talking to myself here.
Well, I mean, that leads into another question, which is, in what ways has writing been, if at all, therapeutic for you?
Oh, so much. Just the act of writing, even, when you're just stressed out and having a bad day, anything, to me, like, anything I'm writing is therapeutic, but especially my first with a Speed of Light, being able to basically write, because it started as just writing it for myself. Writing the story that I needed when I was first diagnosed with MS. That was extremely therapeutic. And it's, on the other hand, it's scary then putting something that personal out there, because people do critique it and you just can't read reviews. But it also, like, touched a lot of people and meant a lot. And people saw themselves in a story that, of chronic illness and disability, like, there's not a lot of rep in literature right now. And so that means a lot, to be able to, have my story out there. That means a lot to people.
Yeah. And you touch upon something that every author faces, which is, the need to be vulnerable. Like, you have to open yourself up to vulnerability, not just for, the critiques that you're going to get, or the potential negative reviews you're going to get, but because you're putting a part of your soul, even if it's fiction, you are putting a part of your soul into the story. You're leaning on your life experiences to craft the world that you're crafting. And, you're exposing yourself. Even if it's under the guise of fiction, you're exposing yourself. And that requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability.
Yeah, it definitely does.
If you were looking at a blank piece of paper right now, I'm just curious, or a blank computer screen, and your job is to write something that day, how do you feel when you're looking at the blank page or blank computer screen?
Nerve-sighted, if that's a word. I think the first is, I always have that, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How did I ever do this? How did I write a book? How does this actually work? I'm not sure how I did it before. But then at the same time, once you slow down and realize, okay, I can write anything I want, blank page, no one has to see this yet, it's just me and the page, then that is very exciting. And because the sky's the limit, you can write anything. And then later you have to think about editing and making it make sense.
Well, it's a job for later.
Exactly.
And finally, if you could get into a time machine. Now, I always go to Back to the Future here, one of my favorite movies. If you can go into the DeLorean, hit 88 miles an hour, have your 121 gigawatts of electricity, take you back in time, and you can meet your younger self, or give that person some advice, what would you tell the younger Elissa?
As far as writing and publishing, and I think I would say that even if it takes a long time, and it's going, it's good, because on the one hand, I'm like, what I want to know that it's going to, how long it's going to take to publish, but at the same time, it's just as exciting. Like, yes, I'm not as young as of course, I would have loved to publish in my 20s, but it's just as exciting now. Like, it'll mean just as much to you, if not more, to do it now at this point in my life.
Yeah. If the advice didn't have to be around publishing, just life advice, what would you tell her?
Oh, wow. Oh, I guess just always remember the importance of friends and family. Like, make sure your loved ones know how much you love them and live in the moment as much as you can.
Live in the moment. Do you feel like there was a period of time where you weren't living in the moment?
I struggle with anxiety. And so, yeah, probably all the time. No, I mean, I constantly have to remind myself that now, and I probably was better at it when I was younger, but at the same time, I feel like now I appreciate, like my parents and siblings and friendships, that people that have, and my husband and people that have always been there for me, that I feel like I appreciate it more now, but at the same time, I feel like, I don't know if it's a mom thing or just me thing, but I worry about the future a lot. So
yeah,
you can kind of combine that.
I could relate to that. I always have such a busy to-do list, and father of triplets, in the past 20 years has been kind of a blur.
Right.
But I've always had so much to do that whenever I'm doing one thing, I'm not focused on it. I'm thinking about the next thing I have to do. And it's almost like I just want to cross everything off my list. And then I find that I'm not enjoying it. So one of the lessons my dog taught me, we just recently lost our 15-year-old Golden.
I'm so sorry.
But as I'm writing, because this is what I do, as I'm writing like my memorial for her, I'm trying to think of all the lessons that she taught me. And one of them was to like stop and sniff, right? So it's kind of like stop and smell the roses. But whenever I would take her for a walk, she, the walks would take an hour, even if we're just going around the block, because she would always stop and smell everything around her, as if to say, hey, buddy, I've been inside all day long. This is my time. Let me sniff. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I need to stop and sniff, and I'm not doing that. So that was one of the things that my little Riley girl told me.
That is really good. I've recently, only recently, as in last week, because my son turned 15 the day after my book came out, so the 8th. And I kind of realized, as I'm planning everything for the launch and planning everything for that, I'm like, I just want his birthday to be perfect. So we have to do this, this, and this. And I realized that that's kind of my MO is, for birthdays, I never stop and enjoy my children as they're getting, and the time with them, because I'm too busy making sure everything goes perfectly. And so this year I'm like, okay, I really want to just slow down. And it was hard because to ignore my phone the day after the book came and everything, but we went mini golfing and we just watched some movies together, and it was just nice. And I'm going to try to keep that up now, where I don't have to plan it all perfectly, just be present and spend time with them.
Yeah, well, that's a good point to end on. And I will let everybody listening know that the book is Iris in the Dark. I almost said The Speed of Light.
That's okay. You can promote that one too.
We can promote both. The book is Iris in the Dark. The author is Elissa Grossel Dickey. The book's available wherever books are sold, I imagine.
Yes. Yep. Because even your local indie, and some of them, I know around here, are carrying them, but they can always order for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Support those independent bookstores. And if you have to buy it, you can of course buy it on Amazon, or bookshop.org is what I always tell people, because they send a cut to the local indie bookstores. Elissa, if people wanted to get in touch with you on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, where would you advise they go?
You can start with my website, elissadickey.com, because all the links are there. But otherwise, I'm Elissa Dickey on Twitter and Elissa Grossel Dickey on Facebook. So you can find me there.
There you go.
You can check TikTok, but it's not as exciting.
Yeah, well, for the younger people out there. Well, listen, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest, or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.